I still remember the first time I set foot in that Walmart. It was late, well past midnight. I had just gotten off my shift at the gas station and was tired, but I needed a few things: groceries, some cleaning supplies, and most importantly, a moment to just zone out. That Walmart was the only thing open at this hour, and the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead made everything feel surreal, almost like time had slowed down. I was walking through the aisles when I noticed something odd. The store was mostly empty, save for a few other late-night shoppers, but there was one man, tall, wearing a hoodie pulled low over his face, standing near the back of the store, staring at a shelf of canned beans. At first, I thought nothing of it, but the way he stood there, unmoving, gave me chills. I didn't want to be paranoid. After all, Walmart's always a bit strange at night, right? People wander, get lost in their thoughts, maybe even a little off, but they're harmless, usually. But this guy, there was something unsettling about him. Something that didn't belong in a typical late-night Walmart. I grabbed my items and started heading toward the checkout, when I saw him again. He was standing by the self-checkout machines, and this time, he wasn't alone. There was a woman beside him, no cart, no basket, just standing silently. She was thin, her face pale and gaunt under the harsh lights, her eyes, wide, almost bulging, like she hadn't blinked in hours. It was like they were waiting for something. Or someone. As I passed by them, I could feel their eyes on me, but I didn't dare look back. Instead, I kept walking, trying to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Just as I reached the self-checkout, I heard a low voice behind me. "Watch your back." The voice was rough, gravelly. I turned quickly, but the man and woman were gone. I didn't know what to think, but my gut told me to leave. Something told me that Walmart at night wasn't the safe place it appeared to be. But what happened next? I couldn't have predicted. I rushed through the self-checkout, scanning my items quickly, hoping to get out of there as fast as I could. But the atmosphere in that place was thick with something I couldn't explain, tension, maybe, or dread. I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling like I was being watched, though when I turned, there was no one in sight. The store was emptier than I'd ever seen it before, and the silence felt suffocating. I was almost to the door when I heard it. A sharp click, like a light switch being flicked on. I froze. The automatic doors hadn't opened yet, but it sounded like they had. The sound came from the back of the store, the electronics section. That was odd. I took a few hesitant steps toward the door, my hand on the handle, but something tugged at me. The noise I had heard wasn't normal. I turned around, slowly, to glance over the aisle into the dimly lit electronics section. That's when I saw it. A man, tall, thin, and wearing a black hoodie, stood just beyond the aisle, his body partially hidden behind a shelf of televisions. His eyes were locked onto mine, and for a split second, it was like he was waiting for me to make a move. My heart raced. There was something too calculating about the way he stood there, almost like a predator stalking its prey. I didn't know why, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. Maybe it was because there was no reason for him to be standing there at this time of night. Who stands in the electronics section at 1:30 a.m., just staring at the shelves? I forced myself to break eye contact and stepped outside, my breath shallow, the night air feeling like a relief. But as soon as I stepped into the parking lot, I realized my car was the only one in sight. No other vehicles. It should have been quiet, but something felt off. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, half expecting a message from a friend. But it wasn't from anyone I knew. The text was simple, unsettling: "Don't go back inside." I looked around, my pulse spiking. There was no way someone knew I had just left the store. I didn't know whether to panic or stay calm. The parking lot was empty, and the only sound was the hum of the streetlights. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, too quick for my brain to process. It was the woman I had seen earlier. She was standing by the entrance, but she wasn't just standing anymore. She was staring directly at me, her face now twisted into a grotesque grin. I froze. This isn't real. But it was. This wasn't some bad dream. I could feel my legs shaking as I took a step back toward the door, but something stopped me. A presence behind me, like something lurking in the shadows. I spun around, expecting to see the man from the electronics aisle, but there was nothing. Except a shadow. It was moving. I wasn't alone anymore. The shadow in the parking lot shifted again, its movement slow and deliberate. I could see its shape now, a figure hunched, as if crouching, inching closer to where I stood. My heart thudded in my chest, and my legs felt like lead, but something deep in me screamed run. I looked back at the entrance of Walmart. The woman was still there, standing just inside the doorway, her grin widening, showing too many teeth. She was so still, like she wasn't even human anymore. I could feel her gaze burning into me, even from across the lot. Then, the shadow behind me moved again, closer. Too close. I spun around just in time to see the figure step into the dim glow of a nearby streetlight. It was the man from the electronics section. The same hoodie, the same unnatural stillness, but now he was closer. Much closer. I hadn't even heard him approach. I took a deep breath, ready to bolt, but something caught my eye. From the corner of the lot, there was another figure, this one taller, broader. A man in a black jacket, face obscured by the darkness. His movements were fluid, almost too fluid, like he didn't belong in the real world. My stomach dropped. They were surrounding me. The text I had received earlier flashed through my mind, "Don't go back inside." What did that mean? And who the hell was sending it? I turned and sprinted toward my car, my keys trembling in my hand. I fumbled with them, trying to unlock the door, but it felt like time was slowing down. My fingers were numb, and I could hear the soft sound of footsteps behind me, getting closer. Finally, the car door clicked open, and I threw myself inside, locking the door just as I heard something slam against the window. I gasped, jerking my head to the side to see the woman standing there, pressed against the glass, her eyes wide and bloodshot. She didn't move, just stared at me with that horrific, unblinking grin. I slammed the car into drive, flooring the gas pedal. The tires squealed as I tore out of the parking lot, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I dared not look back, but I could feel them behind me. I wasn't sure if it was the people, or whatever they were, but they were chasing me. I could sense it, even as I sped down the street, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My phone buzzed again, and this time I almost didn't want to check it, but I did anyway. The message read, "You can't escape. You'll never escape." I couldn't breathe. It was like they knew everything about me. It felt like they were following me, waiting for me to make a mistake, to slip up. I had to get away. I had to survive. But then, just as I glanced in the rearview mirror to make sure I wasn't being followed, something caught my eye. A black figure, tall, moving impossibly fast, was darting between the buildings behind me, just beyond my sight. I could hear footsteps, though I knew no one was close enough to be making them. They were still out there. Still hunting me. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, even after I had left the parking lot behind me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my fingers aching, but I couldn't let go. I kept my eyes on the road, focusing on the streetlights flashing past, but every few seconds, I'd glance into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a figure standing there, just beyond the glass. But there was nothing. Only the dark. The streets were nearly empty at this hour, and every turn I took felt like it brought me further into the unknown. I wasn't thinking straight anymore. All I could hear was the sound of my heartbeat, pounding in my ears, and the hum of the tires on the asphalt. It felt like I was driving in circles. I couldn't shake the fear. I needed to get home. I needed to feel safe again. But as I passed another street corner, a flash of movement caught my eye, a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, my car screeching to a halt just inches away from them. My breath caught in my throat as I looked up. It was the man in the hoodie. The same one who had been standing in the electronics section, the one who had followed me. He was motionless, just standing there in the middle of the street, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, like he was studying me. I didn't know how he got there, but I couldn't stay and figure it out. I threw the car in reverse and backed up as fast as I could, my heart racing. But then my headlights caught something else. The woman. She was standing on the sidewalk, her face still twisted into that terrible grin, her eyes glowing with something unnatural. She didn't move, just stared at me as if she was waiting for me to make the next move. I hit the gas again, this time not bothering to look back. I was barely thinking anymore, only reacting, running on pure instinct. My phone buzzed once more, but I couldn't bring myself to look at it. I couldn't afford any more distractions. But then, just as I turned another corner, my car sputtered. The engine made a strange noise and then died. The silence that followed was deafening. The engine had stopped. The lights went dark. I was completely alone in the car now, and all I could hear was my breathing. I tried to restart the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. Panic flooded me. No. No, no, no. This couldn't be happening. I reached for my phone, but before I could grab it, the sound of footsteps echoed around me, heavy, slow. I froze. I wasn't alone anymore. There, just outside the window, stood the man in the hoodie. He was inches away, his face still obscured by the shadow of his hood, but I could feel his presence. It was suffocating. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. The woman from Walmart had appeared beside him now, standing motionless, her sickening grin stretched wide as she gazed at me through the glass. I could feel the air thickening, the temperature dropping, and I knew, deep down, that this wasn't just some random encounter. This was something worse. Something I couldn't understand, but something that would not let me leave. I tried one last time to start the car. Nothing. That's when the man began to move. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out for the door handle. My heart was hammering in my chest as I watched the man's hand reach for the door handle. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The woman stood silently beside him, her grin still unnaturally wide, her eyes fixated on me with a strange, unblinking intensity. I just knew, that if he got that door open, I wouldn't just be dealing with them anymore. This was something worse. Something I couldn't explain. The handle turned. Click. I screamed, yanking the door lock down, but the man's hand was already inside. His fingers were long, unnaturally thin, and they wrapped around the handle with a grip that felt cold, like death itself had taken hold. I kicked the door with all the strength I had, but it didn't budge. The man pushed harder, the pressure on the door increasing, and I felt myself sliding back in my seat, the back of my head hitting the headrest with a thud. Then, in the blink of an eye, the door opened. I don't know what I expected when I looked up, but what I saw almost made me pass out from terror. The man wasn't alone anymore. There were more of them. More figures, stepping out from the darkness, surrounding my car. Their faces were hidden by the darkness of the night, their movements unnaturally fluid, like they were all part of the same thing. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place as I stared at them, my thoughts scrambling for a way out, any way out. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something that sent chills down my spine. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows on the ground. I turned my head, expecting to see nothing, but I saw something much worse. A shape. Tall, towering over everything else, standing in the alleyway behind me. It wasn't human. It had no real form, just a shifting silhouette that seemed to writhe with an almost liquid-like motion. It had to be the source of the terror. The thing pulling the strings. The figures around my car started to move closer. Their eyes gleamed with malice. The man in the hoodie reached inside, grabbing the door with a strength I didn't think was possible. I thought I was going to pass out from the sheer pressure of fear that crushed down on me. But then, everything stopped. The figures stilled. The air went deathly quiet. Even the shadows seemed to stop moving. I looked to my phone, still in my hand, trembling. It buzzed again. A message. Run. Now. I didn't know why, but I reacted without thinking. I threw the car in reverse and slammed my foot down on the gas. The tires screeched, the car jerked backward, and I managed to pull away from the figures, narrowly avoiding crashing into one of them. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was miles away from that Walmart, my car rattling with the effort. My mind raced. What the hell had just happened? How had they known? How did they find me? I pulled into a gas station, shaking uncontrollably. My hands couldn't stop trembling. I thought I was safe. But then I looked up. And there they were. They were waiting for me, just standing across the street, their figures outlined by the glow of the gas station lights. Their eyes were fixed on me, locked in place. I was being hunted. And worse, they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. I couldn't breathe. I felt a cold sweat breaking out on my skin, my heart racing in my chest. The figures across the street, those same twisted, haunting shapes, were still staring at me, unmoving, as though they were waiting for me to make a move, waiting for me to make a mistake. Their eyes, those eyes, they gleamed, but there was something else in them now, hunger. I grabbed my phone, trying to call for help, but the screen froze. No signal. Of course. The one time I actually needed it, there was no service. My hands were shaking, the panic creeping in, but I forced myself to think. I had to get out of here. I couldn't stay. I couldn't go back to that Walmart. I couldn't let them get closer. I started my car again, the engine sputtering to life. I didn't even care to check my mirrors. I just slammed my foot down on the gas pedal, peeling out of the gas station and back onto the road. The figures didn't move. At least, not at first. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, trying to push the panic down. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a plan, but nothing made sense. They knew where I was. They knew where I'd been. They knew everything about me. I didn't know where to go. I just needed to get far away from them. I was driving aimlessly, trying to distance myself, but the longer I drove, the more I felt like I was being pulled into something I couldn't control. I could still feel their eyes on me, even when I didn't look back. It was like they were still with me, following me at a distance. But then, just as I thought maybe I was in the clear, the car jerked violently to one side. I gasped, barely keeping control of the wheel, and pulled over to the shoulder of the highway. The engine was still running, but the dashboard lights flickered, the car making strange, grinding noises. It didn't feel like a mechanical failure. It felt like something else. I didn't dare step out of the car. I was too terrified. Too aware that the moment I left the safety of my vehicle, I'd be vulnerable. And that's when I saw it. In the distance, at the edge of the highway, standing just outside the reach of the headlights, was the tall figure, the one I had seen in the alleyway, the one that had followed me. It wasn't just standing anymore. It was moving. It drifted closer, not walking, but sliding, like it was gliding over the ground, the air thickening around it, suffocating. My breath caught in my throat, and my body went rigid. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come. That's when I heard the voice. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable, like it was coming from inside my head. "We know who you are." I looked around, but there was no one. The voice didn't come from any of the figures. It didn't even come from the air. It was just there, in my mind. Cold. Insistent. Hungry. I didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear: this was no coincidence. No ordinary stalker or serial killer. These people, these things, were connected to that Walmart. Connected to me. The figure glided closer. Its face, or what I could see of it, was a blur of darkness. I could feel its presence closing in, suffocating. The world around me seemed to darken, like the air itself was being sucked away. I had no choice. There was nowhere left to run. I was already in their grip. I started the car again, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I slammed my foot on the gas. The engine roared to life, but the car wouldn't move. It was as if the road itself was pulling me back, slowing me down, dragging me closer to the figure. It wasn't the road that was stopping me. It was them. I was trapped. The car wouldn't move. The engine revved in frustration, but the wheels barely turned. Panic surged in my chest as I yanked the wheel left, right, trying desperately to break free from whatever hold they had over me, but it was like the very air had turned against me. Every movement felt sluggish, every breath harder to take. I glanced in the rearview mirror again. The figures had gathered, surrounding the car. The tall, shifting figure was directly in front of me now, so close that I could almost feel its cold presence pressing against the windshield. The black shape seemed to melt into the night, distorting like a dark cloud in human form. My pulse raced as I realized, I couldn't outrun them. I couldn't escape. I slammed the car into park, a futile gesture. The steering wheel felt like it was turning to stone in my hands. The windows were closed, but I could hear them. Whispering. Low, guttural voices that seemed to come from nowhere, everywhere, all at once. They spoke in unison: "You cannot escape us. We are always here." I was shaking now, every inch of my body trembling in fear. The woman's face flashed before my eyes again, that grotesque, twisted smile, her hollow eyes staring into my soul. My breath caught in my throat. The man in the hoodie, he was there too. His long, thin fingers were pressed against the window, as if he was trying to break through. "What do you want from me?" I screamed, my voice cracking, but the figure in front of me didn't answer. Instead, I saw the figure, the thing, step closer, its body slowly merging with the darkness. Its face, if you could call it that, was just a blur of shadows and shifting shapes, but there was something in its eyes. Something that knew. Knew everything about me. About all of us. I tried to open the door. It was locked. The key fob didn't work. There was no escape. My hands gripped the wheel, my entire body frozen with terror as the shape in front of me began to dissolve into the air. It wasn't leaving. It was pulling me into its darkness. And then I heard it again. The voice, not in my head this time, but coming from somewhere behind me. "You're one of us now." The world around me grew darker, colder, suffocating. The shadows seemed to stretch, reaching for me, pulling me in. I wanted to scream, but my mouth was dry, my throat tight. Then, just as I thought it was over, everything stopped. The pressure lifted. The figures were gone. The car was moving again, the engine roaring back to life. I didn't know how, but I was driving again. My hands still gripped the wheel, the adrenaline surging through me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I drove for what felt like hours. I didn't stop. I didn't care about anything except getting as far away from that place as I could. Eventually, I pulled into a random motel. I didn't care where I was. I didn't care about anything anymore. As I sat in the room, the silence wrapping around me, I thought I was finally safe. I thought I could breathe again. But then my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with one final message. "We'll be waiting." And that's when I understood. There's no escape. They are always there. Always watching. They're waiting for the next person who dares to enter Walmart. And when you see them, when they see you, it's already too late.